Good morning, everyone. Morning. We're ready to get started. I am Bob Penarski. I am the publisher of the Herald-Standard, Greene County Messenger, and the newly formed Mon Valley Herald-Standard. And we are proud today to be sponsoring and supporting this forum for the 9th Congressional District. For close to 100 years, our institution has always promoted discussion, debate, and education on issues that affect all of our lives and our community. Before we get started, I wanted to, first of all, thank the candidates for coming today. I want to thank Penn State for providing us with this great forum, especially Dr. Charles Patrick. I also want to thank Patty Yager, the Herald-Standard staff reporter, who has been very instrumental in coordinating these forum and debates for us during the past couple of months. So thank you, Patty, wherever you are. There you are. Thanks a lot. I would also like to introduce and give a bio on our moderator today. Our moderator is Joseph P. Kirk. He is the Mon Valley Alliance Executive Director. The Alliance was formed April 1st with the merger of the Mon Valley Progress Council and the Middle Monongahela Industrial Development Association. Mr. Kirk has served as the Executive Director of the Progress Council. In addition to managing the business-sponsored community and economic development organization, under his direction, the Progress Council led the regional efforts to advance the Mon Valley, Fayette Expressway, and Southern Beltway, including research, development, and delivery of testimony and related advocacy efforts. So with that, I would like to introduce Joe Kirk, who is going to be giving everybody here the rundown along with the candidates of how we are going to proceed with this forum here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome to everyone here. Wow, what a great turnout today. I mean, it's a real tribute to folks who care about our system of government and want to see it serve people throughout our region. A couple of our guidelines for today. For the audience, I've already silenced my phone. I hope that you have silenced yours. If you do need to leave the auditorium, please do quietly. We've left the doors open, so that helps in that endeavor. Please refrain, and I appreciate the applause coming up here, but please refrain from applause or commenting on the forum. This is a forum as opposed to a debate, and it's intended to give you as much information as possible. And as I say, we appreciate your taking the time to offer questions on candidates. I have a number of cards here. A number of them we will try to get to. A number are also incorporated as we went through them into either our questions or what we call our lightning round. For our candidates, each candidate has the opportunity to offer a 1-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. Questions will be done in a round-robin format, with each candidate having 2 minutes to respond to the question. If the candidate responds to offer rebuttal remarks, it must be done within the 2 minutes they are provided. Obviously, personal attacks will not be tolerated, and the moderator, myself, reserves the right to end discussion if warranted. I've welcomed the opportunity and honor, really, to serve as the moderator for the Herald-Standard Review's Candidates Forums. This forum is for candidates seeking election to the Pennsylvania 9th Congressional District. Before I introduce our candidates, it is worth noting that there is no Democratic candidate in this election cycle for the district. Barring a successful third-party or write-in candidate in the fall, the successful candidate in the April 26 primary will be your representative in Congress. And today's forum is the only meeting of the candidates in a shared forum or debate. Now let's meet our candidates. Congressman Bill Schuster is seeking his 8th full term representing the 9th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. Among his positions in Congress, Congressman Schuster is chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Mr. Art Halverson is a retired Coast Guard captain, and for the second time, he is seeking the Republican nomination as the Republican candidate for the 9th District. We'll now proceed to our opening one-minute statements, and Congressman Schuster, you're first.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and thank the Herald-Standard and Penn State Fayette for hosting this debate, which is the 5th time that Art Halverson and I will be debating over the last 2 years. I'm so proud to be here and proud to represent this part of the 9th Congressional District. Since I first took office, I've worked hard to represent your conservative values and to help community and folks that live here to solve problems. Now, Art has called this the fringe of the district, called it an inconvenient place. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's because he just doesn't understand the district. There's a third of the population of the 9th Congressional District that lives in the Mon Valley. They said there's not enough GOP or Republicans here. This is the greatest growth in GOP strength in the Mon Valley in the entire district. Thousands of Democrats have switched parties to become Republicans. This part of the Pennsylvania, the region, faces some serious economic challenges because of the Obama administration's EPA war on coal, because of the gas prices being depressed. This region faces challenges, and we need to make sure we're focused on helping them, getting the Obama administration and the EPA off their back. This has been an important part of America for years. Ladies and gentlemen,
please wrap up.
This is not a fringe part of the district. This is a very special place to me. The Schusters are from the Mon River Valley. I was born in McKeesport. My mother, who's here today, and my father grew up in Glassport. My great-grandfather was not only a leading citizen, but the mayor of Monessen, Pennsylvania, which is part of the district. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to be here, proud to be part of this district.
Mr. Halverson.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased by the turnout as well. The Herald-Standard, thank you for, where's Patty? There she is. She's the face of the work that went on to make this possible. The Penn State campus is a beautiful campus. Thank you for opening up your doors for us, Joe. Thank you for moderating today. I think you're going to see a very interesting 1 hour. It's already started out setting a tone. We'll see where it goes from here. 2 years ago, I did run, and I said at that time that we were facing a crossroads in America. And, of course, I was right. But the problem was we didn't make any changes. 2 years later, we're now through that crossroad, and we're on the wrong road because we didn't make a change. That wrong road is evidenced by debt that's out of control, $19.5 trillion, spending that's out of control, it's continuing to exceed revenue by a factor, and we need to turn that around, and this is your opportunity to engage in that debate and inform your vote. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And let's get on to our first question. The question is directed to Congressman Schuster. You have acknowledged a personal and private relationship with an aviation lobbyist who has interest in issues before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which you chair. You have maintained that you have been transparent and that you have complied with House rules. In this election cycle, voters have seemed angrier than ever that legislators and lobbyists have relationships too close for their tastes that include undue influence, campaign contributions, trips, and gifts. And according to the recent CNN poll, congressional approval is hovering around 15%. The Fox poll has it at 14%. Do you think there exists a moral crisis in Washington, political climate, and indeed a crisis in public support? And if so, what would you do to fix it?
Well, thanks, Joe. Let me first address the first question. Shelley Rubino and I do have a private relationship, a personal relationship. I've not hid that from anybody. I've been transparent. And in fact, I've gone above and beyond what the rules of the House say to make sure that this is an appropriate relationship. Again, I did it because it was the right thing to do. Now, concerning the question on Congress, certainly Congress is unpopular because we have not been able to tackle some of the big issues of the day. And the main hurdle to tackling those issues is the occupant of 600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The President of the United States has resisted every attempt by the Republican-controlled Congress that just happened to. There was a change 2 years ago. We control the Senate now, but not the 60-vote threshold. And we've put legislation on his desk. We put legislation on the president's desk to stop the WOTUS, Waters of the United States. We put legislation to defund Planned Parenthood and to repeal Obamacare. He's vetoed it. So the change has occurred in Washington. The debt is one of our biggest national security problems we face today, but the Republican-led House has cut spending by over $2 trillion in the past couple of years. We've decreased spending 4 times in a row. That hasn't happened since the Korean War. So the Republican majority in the House has led the fight. Our problem is the leadership problem in Washington is the President of the United States. So this election is all about getting a new occupant at 1600 Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, for the first time in 40 years, the Pennsylvania primary is going to matter in a Republican election. So I would encourage all of you to get out there and vote. Get out there and vote not only on April 26th, but in November to make sure we put a Republican in the White House so that Republican majorities can pass legislation to help this country move forward.
Mr. Halverson, a candidate for the House of U.S. Representatives needs 1,000 signatures.
Could I ask one question?
Well, yes, you can. Following the question, you have the opportunity to respond to the question or rebut the question asked of Congressman Schuster. You have your own.
The same questions?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Okay?
Just want to clarify that early.
Thank you.
Thanks. Would you start over then?
Certainly can. As a candidate for the House of Representatives, after these lead questions, the questions will be the same for each. Okay?
Gotcha.
As a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, you need 1,000 signatures of registered voters in your party on a petition to submit to the appropriate election department for approval on the ballot. It was discovered that some 50 signatures on your petition were fraudulent, dead folks, some folks no longer reside in 9th congressional districts, and some outright forgeries. Do you think a staff change was an adequate response? And have you or would you apologize to those whose names were improperly used?
Of course, it's not right what happened, and we immediately fired us within 45 minutes of being notified of this by a reporter, actually. I think it was Patty, right? Patty? Notified us of this situation. No other information has been received from anyone about it, but we took it to be true from Patty's as a source, and we responded within 45 minutes to remove that member from our staff. Obviously, that's reprehensible and not going to be tolerated. Mm-hmm. That's not the way the process and the trust of the people is maintained, and that's our highest calling, is to preserve the trust of the people. I want to respond then to the question that was just answered by Mr. Schuster. The popularity of Congress has been referred to by many as being less than the popularity of head lice. The House of Representatives is the people's house, and the highest trust, the power of the purse is embedded in that, and the founders saw that as the closest to the people and the place where legislation and appropriations and the power of the purse would be exercised and policy would be set, because policy in Washington is based on spending, and that's where it's supposed to happen. Instead, we've been betrayed by the leaders in the House of Representatives. The people that we were elected, we gave the House back to the Republican Party, our party, back in 2010, and what have they done with it since? They've not reduced spending 4 years in a row. That's nonsense. That's maybe on the baseline budgeting process, they've reduced the rate of growth of spending, but they've increased spending. They have not decreased spending. Mr. Schuster wants to blame the president for everything and take no responsibility himself. The president's bad enough, but our leadership in the House of Representatives is worse. They are the ones that have the power of the purse. They're failing to exercise that, and I consider it an abdication of their responsibilities as leaders. They need to be changed out, including the representative.
Thank you. We'll go on to our question 3. Verizon workers in Uniontown and their counterparts up and down the East Coast took to the picket lines Wednesday, citing the communication company's plan to consolidate its locations. The unions say Verizon wants to freeze pensions, make layoffs easier. The telecom giant says there are health care issues that need to be addressed, in part due to the rising cost of health care. Another issue that related to that is Peabody Energy, the world's largest publicly owned coal producer, filed for bankruptcy on Wednesday, citing competition from natural gas and the tightening of EPA standards. You know, granted that government does not create jobs, but it can carve a path to make it easier for entrepreneurs to start small businesses and existing businesses to grow. And in light of all of that, what actions would you take to stem the closure of businesses and reinvigorate the economy, particularly in the 9th District? And that goes to Congressman Schuster first.
Well, thank you very much. First, I'm not in the business of advising my opponent, but I would advise him to read the Constitution. The House does have, the Congress has the power of the purse, and revenue and spending bills are supposed to start in the House, but they have to be concurred with to the Senate. So I'm not passing the buck. I'm saying the House and the Senate have to work together and then get the president. That's what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what Art Halverson says or what I say. It's what our Constitution, which is our number one responsibility as elected officials of the federal government, is understanding the Constitution and defending the Constitution. As far as the Verizon situation, this is a classic example of technology transforming a business from the old lines in the ground to now it's all wireless. And that's where the issue lies. I understand these folks are concerned about their jobs going away, but it's the advancement of technology that's causing this. And we need to embrace technology. We need to figure out how to help these folks, if that's the case, how we move them into a different industry. And unfortunately, because of this attack by the president on the coal industry and in the energy industry in general, we've lost thousands of jobs in western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, in the coal industry. And Peabody's just the latest casualty of that. Arch Coal's declared bankruptcy and others. We've got to rein in this EPA. Now, I've fought as my chairmanship of the Transportation Committee, we have jurisdiction over the waters of the United States. We've held hearings, we've passed legislation, and in fact put it on the president's desk. All he had to do was sign it, but he vetoed it. So we are continuing to fight this war on coal. What we need to do is have an all-inclusive energy policy. Let's mine coal. Let's develop the gas field. Let's export gas so that we can make sure that the folks here in the Mon River Valley are able to have these great-paying jobs. That's what we need to do, is stop the advancement of the EPA, and we've done that in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Halverson.
Yeah, after 16 years in Congress, it still takes me by surprise that our congressman would be telling us things that we need to do rather than what he has already done. It's a record of failure. It's a record of failing to achieve. It's continuing to pass the buck. We do own the Senate now in the Republican Party, and again, the leaders are weak and they're unable to get anything done. Harry Reid shows them up. I want my Republican Party to be strong. That's why we gave power back to the Republican Party, but we have it in the hands of leaders who don't know what they're doing. Let me talk about the war on coal for a minute. It's disingenuous for the congressman to address that issue without failing to address the fact that he was part of our Republican Party that gave the EPA $250 million more than Mr. Obama even asked for. So to blame this on the president is disingenuous at best. We need to change the economic climate in America, and we do that by cutting spending. We have to cap it, and we need to cut it. We need to cut taxes. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. No company in their right mind can bring money back that's been earned overseas because that repatriation will face a 35% repatriation tax rate. It's unconscionable that people like Mr. Schuster have made no progress on cutting taxes, which is the way we incite and instill opportunity in the American economy. We have a loss of confidence in our leaders. We have a loss of confidence in our economy because of those leaders. And confidence is the basic building block of any economic renewal. So we need to restore confidence by seeing leaders in Congress who will stand up to this president and not just blame him, will fight for what they believe in, not just talk about it, but actually walk the walk. I'm ready to do that. I'm ready to go to bat against Obama. Will be gone, but whoever the next president is.
Thank you. We'll go on to our next question. Both of you are portraying yourself as conservatives in this campaign. Mr. Schuster, your ads claim that you have, quote, helped lead the charge to repeal Obamacare, a opposed funding for Planned Parenthood, and fought President Obama's liberal agenda every step of the way. Mr. Halverson, your ads claim otherwise. You say that he has betrayed his constituents, stating that he has, quote, voted 5 times to raise the national debt and voted to fully fund amnesty, Planned Parenthood, and Obama trade. These statements made by each of you are contrary to one another. Would you please substantiate your comments? And Mr. Halverson, you are first.
Yeah, happy to. Let's just point to the Omnibus bill, the great betrayal. In 2014, just before Christmas, is usually what happens. They force all the spending bills that they failed to work on because Congress only works 2.5 days a week. So everything gets crushed to the end just before Christmas, and then they threaten to cancel Christmas leave unless they pass this Omnibus bill. So Mr. Schuster was put in charge by Mr. Boehner, who was still in the House at that time, with delivering the Pennsylvania delegation to get that Omnibus bill passed. That Omnibus bill was an atrocity. It fully funded Obamacare. That's why I say that he voted to fully fund Obamacare. It gave the president a blank check for executive amnesty, and that's absolutely was the wrong thing to do. They just caved to him, one thing after another. It fully funded Planned Parenthood. It did all the things that are wrong for America, and Mr. Schuster was party to that. He was a cheerleader for it on behalf of Mr. Boehner for the Pennsylvania delegation. Only one member in the Pennsylvania delegation stood against him to vote against that. And it has led to a continuing decline in our economy, loss of confidence, flat wages. Entrepreneurs, there's no incentive to start a business because there's no hope that there's going to be growth. We need growth in an economy. We do that by cutting taxes, cutting spending, not increasing the debt, closing in on $19.5 trillion. And we're talking about cutting spending the last 4 years. That's nonsense. We got people talking out of one side of their mouth and they're doing another thing. And my whole point of the betrayal is our American Republican leaders have betrayed us by promising to not spend one penny on Obamacare and then fully funding it as part of that Omnibus bill.
Congressman Schuster.
Well, what's nonsense is to say that I have ever supported Obamacare. From the very beginning, I was against Obamacare. And, oh, by the way, much of, if not most of, Obamacare is mandatory spending. We fought very hard to defund, and we've been successful defunding pieces of it, replacing pieces of Obamacare, getting rid of some of the taxes, the IPAB, the death panels. We have stopped those from moving forward. And I've been part of that fight. Just last year, I said no to my leadership when we passed the final appropriations bills, the omnibus at the end of the year. I said no because we did not do enough with spending. I said no because we didn't do enough to protect ourselves against immigration from these folks coming from the Middle East, to reform that system. And I said no because we didn't defund Planned Parenthood. Now, my opponent, Art, has been all over the board. In fact, he said once, and he agrees, I guess we agree on this, is he said, we can't not pay the debt. We've got to have significant reforms, which is what exactly I voted no last time. We didn't have enough. The time before, we've cut spending. He mentioned EPA. EPA's spending levels is at the same level it was in 2008. His facts are just wrong. And again, I've worked hard. Immigration, let's talk about immigration. 2 years ago, he said, the illegal immigrants, well, we got to keep them here. Now he says, send them all back. My record is very, very consistent on that. It's build the wall, make sure we get control of the border, identify who's here illegally, reform the system. And those folks that are here illegally, it is not practical to think we're going to round up 12 million people and send them all back. We have to identify them and then work through a process of making them go back home so that we can make sure people that are here are legal. So, again, my record is quite clear. And I can tell you about this election. My election, my campaign has been about me. Art Halverson's campaign has been about me. And it's been a negative campaign from start to, I'm sure, to finish.
Thank you. This question comes from Russ Rhodes, as we're trying to get some of the audience questions here, a chairman of the Fayette-Reagan Republican Committee. Congressman Schuster, if re-elected to office, how would you, as chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, be able to address the economic needs of Fayette County and the other communities of the 9th Congressional District? And before you respond, Mr. Halverson, if elected, what would you, as a freshman congressman, be able to do to address the economic needs of Fayette County and other communities in the 9th Congressional District? Congressman Schuster, first.
Thank you, Joe. As the chairman of the Transportation Committee, I have already passed legislation that's put significant reforms in areas of water resources, which deals with rebuilding our locks and dams and our ports and harbors in the United States of America. I passed that bill with significant reforms in it. It was fiscally responsible, and we passed it. It's law today, and those reforms are in place now. And it's really important to the Mon River Valley that we rebuild these locks and dams because they're so important to the economy here. I passed a transportation bill, a highway, a surface transportation bill. Again, fiscally responsible. We found the money, so making sure we didn't add to the debt or the deficit. And then we reformed so that states can get those dollars and get out there and rebuild the infrastructure that's necessary in Congress. And I'll continue to do those things as the chairman of the Transportation Committee, as well as continue to fight to reduce taxes and get spending under control. But as chairman of the Transportation Committee, I think I've demonstrated that getting these dollars out, making sure there's certainty out there to let these folks rebuild the infrastructure, whether it's the Mon River Valley, the lakes, the locks and the dams, whether it's our highway system. I was instrumental in making sure we got the dollars to take 219 from Somerset and eventually get it connected to 68. Art opposed that. He'd rather see that money probably go to some big city in the eastern United States or somewhere else. I'm also working hard to figure out how do we get the Mon-Fayette Expressway to connect with Pittsburgh. That's a difficult task, but we're working on that. We're trying to figure out ways to get these infrastructure projects that are partially a federal responsibility. My opponent's been a flip-flop on that, says federal responsibility, there's no federal responsibility. It is, and ladies and gentlemen, here in Fayette County, we're just in the shadow of Route 40, which was the first authorized and appropriated highway built by the federal government. The federal government has a role. We need to reduce those red tape and the hurdles to get these projects out, building faster, so we can help grow the economy with good infrastructure.
Mr. Halverson.
Thank you. Listening to Mr. Schuster, you would think that everything was sunshine and light and happiness, that everything that's going on in this country is good. Everything's taken care of. You don't need to worry about anything. Just reelect him, and it'll continue to be good. Well, I'm here to tell you that we have $19.5 trillion worth of debt. We have undisciplined congressmen who are running around with lobbyists, who are influencing legislation and getting all the wrong outcomes. In fact, what they're getting is failure, failure, failure. Mr. Schuster has an F from the Conservative Review in his conservative votes. He has an F from Club for Growth. He has a F from Heritage Foundation. F, failure. So be very careful to what you hear on the other side of the podium here, because all these things he's saying that sound like success really are leading to failure. And we know it, and the folks that monitor the key votes know it, and that's why his score is an F. All these attributions of what I've said or didn't say, I'm really scratching my head when I've been flip-flopping on these issues. I've been consistent about these issues since I started this campaign 3 years ago, because I was so disgusted with the betrayal that was going on by our leadership, who can't get anything done. We got the House into our hands. We got the Senate into our hands. That's what they promised. Give us the House, give us the Senate, and then we'll take care of things. Now it's, well, sorry, we don't have the White House yet. That's unfortunate. We don't have the White House. But there's no excuse for them not being willing to fight against Obama. Instead, fully fund Obama, including Mr. Schuster, fully funding Obama, fully funding Planned Parenthood, executive amnesty, these things he voted for. That's why he has an F on those scorecards, and he can't denounce that. He can't deny that. He can call me names or say that I'm flopping, but he's failing.
We'll move on to our next question. This question comes from David Show, chairman of the Fayette County Republican Party. As a conservative constitutional Tea Party Republican, it is mandatory that my candidate be moral, ethical, and principled public servant. Please explain how you possess those qualities and contrast that with your opponent. Mr. Halverson, you're first.
Well, I'm a Christian, a born-again Christian. I profess Jesus Christ as my Savior, and I follow the principles of Scripture to guide my life. My wife of 38 years holds me accountable. I have friends of like-mindedness who hold me accountable, including in my church. I served a 29-year military career, 4 years at the academy, and then 29 in military career, which upholds the highest standards of ethical behavior, honesty, and professionalism. I thrived in that organization. I rose to the highest ranks before retiring in 2006. I operate a business that, with 100 commercial customers or tenants who rely on me to provide what I say in our contracts that I will provide, and we work together to create jobs and to provide opportunities in this economy. I look at Washington, and I look at what happened in 16 years in the House Ethics Committee, where we had a senior congressman who was chairman of transportation who was reprimanded and resigned in disgrace. And 16 years later, we have a similar, almost exact situation happening, and yet it's okay. That somehow the ethics must have changed, or else the friends of the current congressman have allowed a different interpretation of the House ethics rules. But as I read it, this close, intimate relationship with a lobbyist who has access to his committee and who is able to pass fast-track legislation through his committee and then cavort in South Beach, Florida, shortly thereafter, almost as a celebration of what they had just foisted on the American public, I think is disgraceful. And as I have said before, I think it is grounds for him to resign, and I called for that publicly. So I would ask Mr. Schuster to recuse himself from any association in Congress from Shelley Rubino.
Congressman Schuster.
What's disgraceful is Art Halverson and his continued personal attacks on me, his misrepresentation of my record. In fact, some of it is just plain not true, but he continues to say it. That's what's disgraceful. Look, I've held myself up to the electorate 8 times, and they've elected me. The people of the 9th Congressional know me because I'm from here. The people of the 9th District know that I was raised here, I raised my family here, and my business that I had was in the 9th Congressional District, not somewhere else in the country. I didn't conveniently move back to the district to find a seat to spend my wealth to run for Congress. That's what Mr. Halverson's done. Now, let me address the issues. He talked about these conservative groups. Who is the Club for Growth? Does anybody know who the Club for Growth is? All we know is there are a bunch of millionaires and billionaires that formed a little clique that want to criticize Congress at every turn. We don't know who they are. That's who he's siding with. The other one is the Heritage Foundation. At some point in some publication, we can make this available to the press, Art has said he will have a 100% voting record with Heritage. I would never say to any group that looks at multiple different kinds of legislation that I would be 100%. You have to, as a member of Congress, you have to look at each and every piece of legislation that comes through. Now, I'm proud of the American Conservative Union, the gold standard. I have an 86% rating. The Chamber of Commerce, I have over a 90% rating. And, oh, by the way, these groups out there that support me, the NRA, I do have 100%. The National Right to Life, I have 100%. These are groups that are endorsing me. They're saying, Bill Schuster is a conservative. Bill Schuster stands up. Bill Schuster does the right thing. So, again, my record's clear out there, and I'm going to stand and defend it any day of the week.
Mr. Halverson. The next question is that the issue of amnesty has dominated the conversation of presidential candidates of both parties. A less talked about topic, but yet vital, is that of sanctuary cities, where illegal immigrants are drawn because of local officials ignore in-place immigration laws. Mr. Schuster has stated he is opposed to granting amnesty, and his record shows that he has voted to block the current administration's attempt to use executive authority to provide amnesty. Mr. Halverson, you have made the statement, and I apologize, I hope I have your quote correct. Those who are here illegally need to identify themselves. They need to be placed in the status where they are being here illegally. And you go on to say that I don't think that there's enough will to deport folks like that, and there's some compassion issues involved. Some of the solutions that are being offered by the current Republican leadership in the House are unacceptable to me. Would both of you clarify your stance on immigration and discuss what measures, if any, should be taken against those communities that harbor illegal immigrants and, of course, address the larger issue? And this would be to Mr. Schuster first.
Well, my record is crystal clear. I have a voting record that I am opposed to amnesty in any way, shape, or form. I've laid out my principles, and I said it here today. We need to build a wall, protect our border, making sure we know who's coming back and forth in those borders. We need to identify, and it's easy to say they should identify themselves, well, they're not if they're here illegally. We have to help them identify themselves, find out who they are, and unlike Mr. Halverson, who has said we need to keep them here in the United States, we probably don't have a will, there's a will to send them home. We have to figure out who they are and figure out a system to move them through a process to send them back home, find out, and then say legally you can come here or not come here. Again, my record is crystal clear on this. And when it comes to immigration today, when you see folks from failed states, I've said stop allowing people from failed states to come into this country, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Christians, whether they're Jews. If it's a failed state and we don't know where they've been, we need to find that out, and we need to stop those folks from coming in until we can find out where they're from. Again, this is something I've supported throughout my career in Congress. And again, I didn't flip-flop on it. I've always said that this is what we should do. So again, my record is clear. I have a conservative record. We voted to stop these cities that provide harbor for them. It's wrong that we do it. We've seen people getting killed because these cities allow illegals to be there and they kill people, law-abiding citizens. We voted to try to stop this. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, as your member in Congress, I have achieved things when there was a Republican in the House in this presidency. We cut taxes. We controlled spending. We built our military up to go after the terrorists. Today, the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is opposed to all of those things. So come this November, we need an occupant in the White House that when I send legislation, when my Republican colleagues send legislation to the White House, a president that will be there that will be able to sign it and change the course of this country.
Mr. Halverson.
Well, talk is cheap, and the condition of our country is such that Mr. Schuster cannot point to any progress being made on the debt, on the spending, on the taxes. They continue to go up, and the country continues to go down. And so giving him 2 more years to fail in his attempts or in his talk about what he wants to do, I don't think is warranted. Of course, I do not support sanctuary cities, but Mr. Schuster has voted for funding for those sanctuary cities and has not done anything to stop the funding that goes to those cities when he has the power in Congress to do so. I want to, this quote that you took, I don't know what the context was for it, but certainly one word I point to is compassion. Many of these issues require compassion. I'm not a brute that's going to go around knocking on doors, jackbooted, and ask people if they're illegal aliens and drag them over the border. That's not the way to do it, and I'm sure that's the context in which that question was offered. I want to jump back to a previous question about the gold standard and these rating agencies. You all know about Heritage Foundation, why I would want to align with their positions, because they are truly a conservative organization. Mr. Schuster is truly not a conservative congressman. That's why he has a 49% score. The ACU, by the way, rated Mr. McConnell even higher than Mr. Schuster. Now, if that's the gold standard, it's not. The ACU does not have him rated that highly because his rating goes down every year.
It's 86
He's
lifetime.
referring to his lifetime rating because he started out strong, and every year, every term we give him, he gets more and more liberal and more of a failure, and his score continues to go down, even with the ACU that rates McConnell that highly. My time is up. I'll stop there.
Okay. This question comes from a number of folks, including some of you in the audience. Do you agree that one of the primary roles of the House of Representatives is to control the purse strings of the nation? Would you give an example how you have or would fulfill that duty in the future? And we start with Mr. Halverson.
Well, it's very clear from the Federalist Papers. The Founding Fathers understood that the origination of appropriations bills would be in the House of Representatives, the People's House, and that's what they call the power of the purse. If we had leaders who understood what that meant and how they could use that to influence public policy, we'd have an entirely different America today. And that takes me back to my main point that we don't have the leaders in the House of Representatives. We don't have a speaker who will represent and do things by regular order. He can say he's trying to, but even Mr. Ryan now, after Mr. Boehner failed and was forced to resign in disgrace for his failure, is talking about it but still not getting it done. We will not pass a Republican budget. Mr. Schuster could have something to say about that, but he doesn't. We're going to move forward with the 12 appropriations bills without a budget. That means without a funding program, without a cap, without a limit that's already agreed to up front that we will not exceed that cap. That's how they continue to spend more money every year without controlling it. That's how the debt keeps going up. And did you know, by the way, that the debt ceiling has been suspended? We don't have a debt ceiling currently until February 2017. Mr. Schuster was party to that. So I would go in there and I would make it very clear that unless we have a budget in place that sets the cap for spending, I'm not going to participate in this sort of foolhardy approach to exercising our power of the purse. Yes, we need to do the 12 appropriations, but we need constraints. The problem is we don't have anyone who has a sense of a strategy. Where is it we want to go? How are we going to cut spending? Where are we going to cut spending? It's not all mandatory spending. Over time, everything is flexible and can be, we talked about Obamacare being mandatory spending. That's nonsense. Ultimately, it's discretionary spending. And Mr. Schuster's talked about that on both ways. So we need to know where we're going. We need a strategy. We don't have people in the House who understand strategy, and that has to change.
Congressman Schuster.
As I mentioned earlier, and Art has said that the spending bills and tax and revenue bills have to originate in the House, but it's clear in the Constitution it has to concur. The Senate has to concur, which means the Senate has to agree, and that's been a stumbling block for us. But as I've said, and I'll continue to say, and my facts are correct, and you can check them out, over the last few years, we've cut, as a Republican majority, $2.1 trillion in spending. We've reduced spending 4 years. That hasn't, in a row, that hasn't happened since the Korean War. We've been part of trying to get budgets passed to make sure that we get spending under control. But it's not just about spending, ladies and gentlemen. It's about growing the economy. And you do that by changing the tax code. Now, we changed the tax code in 2002 or 2003. We put some significant cuts in place. And year after year, we fought to reauthorize those, and just last year made some of them permanent. So those are the kind of things that we're working on to help this economy grow, and also reducing regulations. Speaker Ryan, who's now castigated, he's no good, is a very bright, hardworking conservative, and we're putting forth an agenda. We're trying to come up with a plan to run on in this presidential year based on Article I functioning of how do we get back our Article I rights that over the last 100 years we've given up to the executive branch? How do we reduce simplify the tax code? And how do we reduce the regulatory burden? And that's one of the task force I serve on. The regulations out there have gone wild. We never replace any of them. But with a Republican in the White House and a Republican House and a Republican Senate, I can guarantee you we will reduce regulation, we'll continue to drive down taxes, and we will control spending. That's the prescription to get the deficit and the debt under control, and getting this economy moving forward is an incredibly important part of the growth here, not only for that debt and deficit problem, but for people living right here in the Mon River Valley.
Our next question is that two of our bitterest enemies, Iran and North Korea, are openly declaring war, if you will, on their desire to destroy us. And both are developing intercontinental missiles that can carry nuclear warheads. Has the current administration underestimated the potential of the threat of these two countries? And what, in your opinion, should the U.S. do to reduce this threat? And that goes to Congressman Schuster.
Thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome. Ladies
and gentlemen, don't be surprised if Art says I'm responsible for the North Koreans' nuclear program or the Iranians. Everything else he says that happens in Washington is my responsibility. But ladies and gentlemen, we've got a president who made two Democratic presidents, and they didn't learn from each other. The first Democratic president was Bill Clinton that did a deal with the North Koreans. And what happened? They developed nuclear. They're developing their ballistic missile system under an agreement. And the same person that negotiated that bill or that treaty was the same person negotiating with the Iranians. This president has given up billions of dollars to the Iranians so they will be able to continue to develop their ballistic missile system, which we see already. They will have a nuclear weapon. There will be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Already today, the Saudi Arabians and the UAE, they're looking to buy one because they know their mortal enemy, the Iranians, the Persians, are going to get one someday. This president has made bad deals. Congress has tried to stop him, but again, under the Constitution, the president has that power to negotiate, and it's the Senate that is able to approve or disapprove of these treaties. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we come back to keeping a Republican majority in Congress, keeping someone like myself that's a defense hawk that serves on the Armed Services Committee, that makes sure we're spending on our troops and the defense of this country, which is a number one priority. That's important, but having somebody in the White House that can lead this nation, that can demonstrate to the world, just like Ronald Reagan did in 1980, that we are not going to tolerate bad behavior. We're not going to tolerate threats. The Chinese are spreading out into the South Pacific. The Russians are doing whatever they damn well please in their part of the world. Again, we have the Iranians, and ISIS is on the march. And the simple strategy of mine for ISIS is to find them, kill them, destroy them. That's what we ought to be doing in the Congress, which is we are passing those types of legislation, but we need a president of the White House executing that.
Mr. Halverson.
Yeah, I find it telling that Mr. Schuster would make a joke about personal responsibility. He does have a responsibility as a member of Congress, as your representative, and he's making a joke about it that he's not responsible, passing the buck. He even said earlier, I don't want to pass the buck. Well, that's what you're doing, Mr. Schuster. You're passing the buck. You're not accepting responsibility for the position. You want to take credit for being chairman of transportation or being on the 8th SAC, and yet you don't want to take responsibility for the condition of the country and the condition of the world. Well, I say then step aside and let someone else who's willing to take responsibility to serve in Congress and represent these good people who are under threat from a world that is increasingly violent. The nations that have been cited, Iran and North Korea, obviously want to destroy us. They want to destroy Israel. And we are taking a very tepid response, if a response at all. You know, Congress has less than 1 in 5 who have any military experience whatsoever. I've got 29 years finishing up in Washington, D.C. at the highest levels of our national security infrastructure, reorganizing the entire Coast Guard, helping to stand up the Department of Homeland Security, having a master's in strategic studies at the Air War College. I understand air power. And Mr. Schuster, in the last debate time, 2 years ago, was very supportive of Mr. Obama's approach of plinking Toyota gun trucks, thinking that bombing and drone attacks would somehow contain ISIS. Well, ISIS is on the move. 2 years later, he's now come to my side where he's talking about boots on the ground. He sees the threat actually is existential. They're in our country. Our failure to build the wall, which he's been there 16 years, it's been authorized since the Bush era, and it's still not built. So you get no credit for that, Bill. You have failed to build the wall, protect us on our southern border, and further failure. ISIS is on the move because we have cut troop strength.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move to our what we call our lightning round, which are 1-minute questions. And again, I'll be incorporating some of the questions from the audience. I'm also going to make sure that we allow time for the closing remarks. First one, does 1,237 delegates mean 1,237 delegates to secure the GOP nomination, or should the rules be changed? Mr. Halverson.
I'm happy with the rules staying where it is. The problem is our party, for which I want to have an increasing influence on, needs to be genuine with the public. We are threatening to change things because there's a sense, at least, that the senior members of our party aren't happy with the candidates or one of the candidates, and they want to move things around. And what they're doing, of course, is violating the trust of the people, that our own party can't be trusted to do things and follow the rules. The rule of law is at issue across many of these issues that we've talked about. At the heart of our immigration concerns and letting people come in without enforcing the law on the border, enforcing the laws when people are here, sending them back. And our own party is contributing to that breakdown in confidence on the part of the people about the rule of law. I'm happy with the 1,237 rule. I think whoever gets it on the first ballot is our candidate, And after that, of course, it's a brokered convention. Anything goes.
Congressman Schuster.
1,237, that's the rules. Whoever gets to 1,237 is going to be our nominee. I, for one, will support our nominee. Whoever it is, we have 3 candidates that are in 100. I'm confident it'll be one of the 3 that get there. And as I said before, this is really important that we as Republicans band together. And I can tell you this. I've supported Republican candidates. I support the president. I support Pat Toomey. Art, just after the last election, after I won that election, he called me up. And there's only 3 witnesses to that conversation that I know of. It's Art, me, and God. Art committed to me that he was going to support me as the Republican nominee. Then he went out and volunteered to work for my Democratic opponent. And that's not unusual for Art Halverson. One of his campaign top trusted lieutenants is a left-wing liberal from Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. His office is headquartered in that person's house. And this person is known to have close ties to the Sanders campaign as well.
Time is up.
Wow.
Thanks, Art.
Okay. Maybe you can answer this very quickly. Trump, Cruz, Kasich. Schuster? Congressman Schuster.
Whoever gets 1237, I think all 3 offer positives for America.
And if there's a brokered convention?
We'll see what happens in the Pennsylvania vote and the district vote.
Okay. Mr. Halverson, Trump, Cruz, or Kasich?
Well, whoever wins the nomination with 1237 in a brokered convention, I will examine the process as it has led to there. I think there are pluses and minuses with each candidate. I was privy to a conversation apparently with Mr. Schuster and with God, and I'm shocked by Mr. Schuster's statement. So
that's what you told me after the last election.
No, sir, it's not.
Well, Art, you have to deal with that.
I did not support. And I did not support the Democratic. No, please don't interrupt me because I don't interrupt you. So I've got time on the clock, so that means your mic is off. I'm really shocked at where you have gone with this to close out what was otherwise a very nice forum, and you're casting aspersions now. They're absolutely disgraceful, and I would love for the audience to recognize that. And so that's as much as I'll say about it.
Okay.
Can I rebut that?
Well, within the 1 minute,
seconds.
once I offer the question, you have the option of answering the question or rebuttal. We have 1 minute, and the question is, should any student debt be forgiven? Congressman Schuster, you have 1 minute.
I think that students should have to pay for their debts and their loans, just like everybody else in this society. But let me just say, casting dispersions, he's been doing this his whole campaign. He started out saying he wasn't going to run a negative campaign, and that's the only kind of campaign he knows to run. He had that conversation with me, and he can deny it. That's why I said there's only three witnesses to it. He'll have to settle up with the 3rd one. And my staff can provide we can provide the volunteer sign-up online that Mr. Halverson did with my Democratic opponent last time. And you can go to Hollidaysburg and go down the street and find out where this house is. It housed at least 2, maybe 3 of my Democratic opponents' Hollidaysburg campaign headquarters. Now, it's Art Halverson's campaign headquarters in Hollidaysburg. It's owned by a known liberal in Blair County. He's known to have ties to Bernie Sanders, this known liberal in Blair County. So, I mean, Art will, I think, say or do anything to get this job in Washington, and that's just not what I'm going to do. I'm going to be straightforward with the people, tell them what I think,
time is up.
Tell them when I'm wrong, and tell them when I'm right.
Mr. Halverson.
Yeah, the easy money issue of student loans. The easy money, that means cut it. Your time is up.
Okay, sir. Please. Thank you.
The easy money component of student loans has to be changed. I want everyone who wants an education to be able to get an education that's fundamental to America's core beliefs. But giving money to people who can't pay it back is nonsense. The system could be modified so that the money isn't going to the institutions. It's portable, just like I would like to see health care portable for patients to carry the funding for their health care. Students should be able to carry the money for their education. And then let me just use these last couple of seconds here to say, if Mr. Schuster's record is negative, I don't think it's on me that I would be running a negative campaign because I'm highlighting his negative record.
Okay. Our last question before the closing remarks by our candidates, and I'm posing this one because I think it genuinely represents some of the frustration of voters, and that is with the power grab of the judicial and executive. What short of a constitution of states can we do to redress this issue?
First?
Yes, Congressman.
Well, first and foremost...
I'm sorry, that would be Mr. Halverson is first.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, it may be that a constitution
Apologize.
of the states is necessary because it has become so out of control, and I blame our party's leaders for allowing it to do so. They have the power of the purse. They had the ability to constrain this guy, and they failed to do it. They funded Obamacare. Mr. Schuster fully funded Obamacare. And as I said, funding, follow the money. That's where the policy is made, where you spend the money. Whether he agrees with it or not, I'm not to judge. But he funded it, and people need to know that. He funded Planned Parenthood as part of that cromnibus. He funded executive amnesty. He gave the president the money to execute that. That was reason to not fund it. He did fund it, therefore, he's disqualified to say anything because that's his record. It's not me campaigning negatively. That's refuting or pointing out to the American people what his record is. It is a negative record. It's a record of failure, and if he keeps funding things, I'm going to keep calling him out for it.
Congressman Schuster.
You can say it over and over. It doesn't make it true, Art, just like your campaign. And many of the things that he said, ladies and gentlemen, my staff is prepared, especially those in the media. We can show you these various flip-flops on amnesty, on trade, on whether the transportation is a federal role or not. He flip-flops. And generally, he changes his position. If I come out for something, he's opposed to it. I'm not smart enough to do this, but I hope I don't come up with a disease to some incurable, a cure to some incurable disease, because he'd be opposed to it. That's what he's demonstrated this entire time in this debate. Now, dealing with the judiciary, November is critical. We have to elect somebody that's going to nominate and put on the bench somebody that believes in the conservative values that we have. That's how we start off. Constitutional convention, sure, we ought to look at that. But the here and now is getting the right person in the White House to nominate the right person to take the place of Anton Scalia to make sure he's a conservative justice.
2-minute closing statements now. Mr. Halverson.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've seen how this thing has come to a close, and I think that's evidence that we have a problem. We have a career politician who will do anything, say anything, to win. We have a government that's been taken over by lobbyists, of the lobbyists, by the lobbyists, for the lobbyists. Is that better? Thank you. I'm not owned by the lobbyist. Mr. Schuster is. In fact, he cavorts with a lobbyist who lobbies his committee, passes legislation that favors his lobbyist. That's a conflict of interest of the highest order. It breaks down the trust of the American people for our government. Confidence is at a low, low level. Our nation is struggling. Our nation is failing. We're only propped up because everyone else is failing worse. We're supposed to be the city on a hill. And there's nothing to look up to in America anymore because we're cutting our military. Our economy is weak and weakening. This last quarter, they had to struggle to fudge the numbers to get a positive growth rate, 0.1%. The high spending, the inability to cut taxes, the inability to cut and cap and cut the debt, our revenues are at record levels because companies won't invest. They'd rather pay the taxes than invest because there's no return on investment. We just hit a record first 6 months of this fiscal year, $1.5 trillion. That's a $3 trillion revenue rate for the year, and yet we spend almost $4 trillion. And there's no spine, there's no strength, there's no state of mind for our Republican leaders to stop that spending. That means we need to replace them, and I ask that you would send me to Washington to replace Mr. Schuster.
Congressman Schuster.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. Thank all of you for coming out today. Thank those at home watching this debate. It's streaming live, I understand. Not that I understand that very well, but that's what they tell me is happening. I want to thank Penn State and the Herald-Standard for putting this together. Again, this is the 5th time in 2 years that I've debated art. I am so proud to represent the people of the 9th Congressional District. And for the time I've been there, I've been committed to working hard to finding solutions, to representing your conservative values in Washington, D.C., working back here in the district, trying to solve problems of whether it's the lady with the Social Security problems or a community that's got water problems. And that was one of the first things I was able to do here in the Mon River, up the mountain in Fayette County, is they didn't have potable water. And we worked hard to solve that problem for those people there. And now we're in Washington trying to solve those other problems that face this nation. But ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, the negative campaigning that's gone on. And Art called this part of the district the fringe. He called it an inconvenient location. A third of the people that this district represents are here. I don't think they're the fringe. I've explained to you, this is where my family's from, the Mon River Valley. And I'm committed to, if you reelect me, to go back to Washington and address those issues the day, whether it's the debt, the deficit, making sure America is safe, making sure our interests around the world are safe. And I've committed to that for the last 16 years. I've done my duty. I've worked hard. And the folks here in the district know who I am. I was raised here. I raised my family here. I actually had a business and employed people in the 9th Congressional District. So I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to serve you in Congress and your conservative values. So I'd ask you again, on April 26th, when you go out to cast your vote, consider voting for Bill Schuster to go back to Washington and continue to fight for you, for your values and your interests. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for the great support you've given me, and may God bless you.
I also want to thank all who took their time on a beautiful Saturday to come inside and participate in our political process. And for those who are online viewing, hopefully the technology worked great today and everyone had an opportunity to view this, I think, spirited, engaging, but civil discussion between candidates who will represent you in an important branch of government in the United States. Do go out and vote on April 26th. Encourage your friends to do, because the most important part of our system of government is that folks participate in the voting and participate in working with candidates to help meet their goals and vision for our country. Thank you very much. Art, thank you.